Good evening, I'm Wendy Mesley, and this is The National. Malicious software seizes control of computers in dozens of countries.
I think it's a heinous crime, this hacking, because they're putting people's lives at risk.
We have tips on keeping safe.
President Trump is in dangerous territory.
Engulfed in controversy, Donald Trump lashes out in a tweet.
That's not a threat. He's simply stated a fact.
An expert panel casts doubt on a very common surgery. Learning secrets from an ancient family.
I think it's huge. I think it's one of the most important archaeological sites in Canada.
Plus the art show that's blowing minds in Washington.
I feel like I'm on an acid trip.
With a simple click, people in 100 countries were virtually mugged today. In just a matter of hours, what may have seemed like a harmless email attachment spread infectious software across tens of thousands of computers, triggering a twofold attack: lockdown, then shakedown. Suddenly, people, businesses, even governments were being asked to pay a ransom to get their information back. And in the UK, it put lives at risk. Thomas Daigle has our story from London.
Hospitals told patients to avoid the ER unless absolutely necessary. Signs warned of significant delays, and some non-urgent surgeries were postponed.
I think it's a heinous crime, this hacking, because they're putting people's lives at risk.
Healthcare workers saw their computers infected with ransomware. Oops, your files have been encrypted, the screens read. And to gain access, send $300 in the online currency Bitcoin. The attack took down computer and phone systems in hospitals and clinics right across England and Scotland.
There will be a backlog of things like repeat prescriptions, which we do electronically. We've had patients unable to book future appointments and things this afternoon.
At first, it looked like a targeted attack on Britain's healthcare network, but it turned out to be something much bigger.
It's an international attack, and a number of countries and organisations have been affected.
The malware spread to personal and corporate computers in dozens of countries. Europe and Asia were hit hardest. Among the infected were Spain's largest telecom company and Russia's Interior Ministry. All of it linked to a cyber weapon said to be used by American spies. A tool to hack into Windows was stolen from the National Security Agency, then leaked by a group known as the Shadow Brokers.
If it's correct that this particular exploit came from an NSA vulnerability, I think the political implications will be absolutely huge.
Microsoft released a patch to protect users from this exact security hole in March, but it seems British hospitals and other networks hadn't installed the fix. The cybersecurity expert warned the National Health Service 6 months ago that employees were using out-of-date software.
It's hard not to say told you so, but seeing something like this wasn't exactly a big surprise. And, if anything, hopefully reiterates the point of how important it is to patch updates.
This all began with a file disguised in an email attachment. Someone opened it and it quickly spread from there. What's still unclear is the exact scale of the attack and how much damage it's caused. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, London.
Whether on a large or small scale, good security routines can limit the damage done by online attacks. It's advice you've heard before because it works. Back up files often to a hard drive that doesn't stay connected to your computer. Keep up to date. Don't put off system updates because everything runs fine the way it is. Remember, today's attack seems to have exploited thousands of machines without the latest security patch. And stay informed. Just like chain letters and emails from princes, researching what's fake can make hoaxes easier to spot. For all his mixed messages, changes in tune, and outright contradictions, there's at least one way in which Donald Trump has shown remarkable consistency. When something gets under his skin, he doesn't let it go. Today, the latest case in point. It has to do with his firing of James Comey and the ferocious response from a relentless media. Trump tweeted early morning warning shots at both. A veiled threat for the former FBI director and for the press, musing about choking off their access. Lindsay Duncombe picks up the story.
If the goal of Donald Trump's unscheduled appearance greeting military spouses was to divert attention from the Comey crisis, it didn't work.
It shows a president, in my mind, that is becoming increasingly more unhinged.
3 days after Trump fired FBI Director James Comey, who was in charge of the investigation into possible links between Russia and the Trump campaign, Trump appeared to threaten him on Twitter, writing, "James Comey better hope that there are no tapes of our conversations before he starts leaking to the press." Trump could have been reacting to news reports quoting sources close to Comey. They say Trump asked the FBI director to pledge his loyalty at a dinner in January. Comey reportedly refused.
Is that true?
No.
Did that happen? That did not happen?
No.
Trump's press team was repeatedly asked if any tapes exist.
Is the President of the United States currently recording conversations taking place in the Oval Office?
I think the point that I made with respect to the tweet is the president has no further comment on this.
It's been a rough week for Trump's spokespeople. The president himself has contradicted their statements about the firing. The reason? He says he's too busy to keep his people up to date. Trump tweeted, "As a very active president with lots of things happening, it is not possible for my surrogates to stand at a podium with perfect accuracy," suggesting he might cancel all future press briefings, an idea he repeated in an interview with Fox.
You don't mean that. Well, just don't have them. Unless I have them every 2 weeks and I do myself. We don't have them. I think it's a good idea. First of all, you have a level of hostility that's incredible, and it's very unfair.
Trump's critics are using increasingly strong language in their criticism.
President Trump is in dangerous territory. What we are facing now is a question of whether there's obstruction of justice.
That's a key phrase because obstruction of justice could potentially lead to impeachment proceedings. But that would have to begin with House Republicans, and for now, they're sticking by the president. Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Washington.
For more on the president's firing of James Comey and what it could mean, I'm joined from Indiana by Lou Caprino, a former longtime FBI agent. So, Mr. Caprino, the head of the FBI has been fired. Now there's this apparent threat to silence him. What impact do you see this having on the actual investigation? Do you think the FBI will feel some kind of chill here, or will it be empowered?
I don't know if it'll feel a chill. I look at it as the FBI's CEO has been terminated. That does not mean that the rest of the agency has been displaced or terminated or fired. And I think the investigation will go on. I think the dedication and the hard work of the many FBI agents who are involved in this and other investigations will be undaunted because we lost a director. The FBI is much bigger than a single individual. So I think they will continue on course, working closely with the Department of Justice and with the U.S. Attorney's Office, conducting their domestic and international leads.
Donald Trump denied today that he ever asked for Comey's loyalty here, but he said he wouldn't say anything wrong with a president doing that. Is it wrong? Would it be wrong?
I don't know if it's wrong, but I think one must understand that an FBI agent pledges loyalty to the U.S. Constitution, and not to the director, not to any single individual. I don't know if it's wrong, but it's something that I don't think a director or any other FBI agent should do or would do.
Trump tweeted that he was told by Comey before the firing that he was not under investigation here. Does that sound right to you?
I don't know. I don't know the current state of the investigation, but I will tell you that any investigation changes course over time. I don't think it would be prudent for anyone to tell a potential individual or subject involved in an investigation if he or she were not the subject of such an investigation. I think investigations just change too often, too frequently, and it's not something that an FBI official, I think, would commonly tell someone unless the investigation was over.
Lou Caprino, thank you so much. Former FBI agent Lou Caprino, who is in Indiana tonight.
Thank you.
Whatever motivated the Comey firing, Trump himself has admitted that the FBI investigation into possible connections between his campaign and Russia was on his mind. Today, the White House released a letter from the president's tax lawyers detailing, without any corroborating documentation, how few financial connections he's had since 2005. The letter points to two main sources of Russia-connected income. In 2013, the Trump-owned Miss Universe pageant earned $12.2 million, and a substantial portion of that was attributable to the event held in Moscow. The other was the 2008 sale of a Florida estate to a Russian billionaire for $95 million. Trump's tax returns themselves were not disclosed. Coming up, recording presidential conversations. It's a loaded topic with a scandalous history. We'll get perspective from an expert.
This is a massive humanitarian tragedy.
Plus, millions face starvation in Yemen. We shed light on a little-seen crisis. Residents of Kelowna, BC will be on high alert for flooding this weekend as days of rain and melting snow push waterways and lakes to their limits. More than 400 properties remain under evacuation alerts or orders. An 8-kilometer inflatable dam is being installed to protect the downtown area, including the hospital. And officials are raising a dike along one of the two creeks that run through the city. And some improvement today in parts of Quebec hit by flooding. Water levels in Gatineau and the Montreal area have started to recede, and heavy rains forecast for this weekend have now been downgraded. But further east, in the Mauricie region, the risk of more flooding remains high. About 4,500 properties have been flooded across the province, and more than 2,000 soldiers are on the ground. An Ebola outbreak has been declared in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The World Health Organization has confirmed at least one person has died from the highly contagious virus. At least 9 other people are thought to be infected in the country's northeast. Medical experts have been deployed to the area to determine the severity of the situation. The last Ebola outbreak in DRC was in 2014, killing 49 people. It was not related to the major outbreak in West Africa. Each year, thousands of Canadians undergo a popular surgery to deal with knee pain. But a new study suggests it could be a big waste of time and money. As Christine Barak tells us, when our knees start to go, there may not be a simple fix.
6, 7.
Lorraine Holt has put a lot of mileage on her knees.
Oh, I'm feeling this.
3. Good. 1.
A former gymnast and avid runner, she says after years of wear and tear, a simple bend became agonizing.
Yeah, because the pain was really bad, and I'd spoken to some other people who said, oh, it sounds like this, and it sounds like you'll probably have to have surgery.
Arthroscopic surgery for knee pain is one of the most common procedures in the world. Doctors insert a tiny camera through small incisions to see inside the joint. Then small instruments are used to cut damaged tissue.
It's like a little vacuum cleaner with a blade.
Problem is, an international panel of surgeons and patients say for most people, it doesn't help.
What we found and what we suggested was that actually in the long term the arthroscopic surgery wasn't doing anything to benefit the patients. It didn't have any effect at all long term.
And by long term, he means more than 3 months. Studies going back over a decade showed the surgery didn't help with arthritic knee pain, but doctors continue to use it for common symptoms related to arthritis and aging, including meniscus tears, sudden pain, and clicking and catching of the knee. In Ontario alone, a vast majority of the 27,000 arthroscopic surgeries performed last year were arthritis-related. The price tag, more than $30 million.
If something's been done a certain way for so long, it takes a lot to kind of go a different direction. Do about 5.
Physiotherapy has alleviated much of Holt's pain. Experts say exercise, weight loss, and pain medication are better options.
And I look back and I think, thank goodness
Experts say arthroscopy can help younger patients who've had sports-related or accident-related injuries. But for those with arthritis or chronic pain, knee replacement surgery, which carries risks of its own, may eventually be the only option. Christine Barak, CBC News, Toronto.
Ontario Provincial Police have laid charges after a multi-vehicle crash yesterday that killed 4 people. The collision occurred on the 401 highway near Kingston. A Quebec transport truck driver faces 6 charges, including dangerous operation of a motor vehicle causing death. He was arrested at the scene. Pilots at WestJet have voted to unionize. 62% of the airline's 1,400 pilots were in favor of joining the Airline Pilots Association. WestJet says it is disappointed with the outcome, but it will now focus on working with the union. The former captain of the Costa Concordia was sentenced to 16 years in prison today. Francesco Schettino turned himself into authorities after losing his appeal. In 2012, he ordered the massive cruise ship into shallow waters where it ran aground and later capsized. 32 people died. Schettino was dubbed Captain Coward by Italian media for abandoning a ship in the middle of the rescue operation. For archaeologists, piecing together the past can mean a lot of hours in the dirt, only to end up with an incomplete picture. But soon there will be a striking image of the past on display for Canadians that filled out with help from a BC First Nation. Tom Perry has the story behind it.
They are like travelers from another time, ancient faces long gone, but still familiar to some.
It's like reaching past, touching your past. It's one of those things that everybody wants to find a little bit of the past, a little bit of their history.
The images are part of a new display that opens Canada Day at the Canadian Museum of History. Vivid, lifelike depictions of 4 people who lived roughly 4,000 years ago near what is now Sechelt, BC. A man in his 50s believed to have been a powerful chief, 2 younger men who may have been twins, and a young woman.
Whoever these people were, they knew each other. I think that they're likely related, and that this is a place where the chiefly families are buried.
Archaeologists first discovered the bodies in 2010. They found them along with hundreds of thousands of stone and shell beads, a sign of great wealth and influence. They call the burial site one of the most elaborate they've ever seen.
I think it's huge. I think it's one of the most important archaeological sites in Canada.
Experts used computer imaging to reconstruct the faces and features of the 4 individuals. The team worked hand in hand with the Sechelt Nation to make sure their ancestors were treated with respect. For some band members, the faces in this new exhibit feel like family.
His skin tone, his high cheekbones, the strong jawline, the forehead, the dark, thick hair. It totally looks like my dad.
Archaeologists say they've learned much from their work on this project, but they still have many questions about who these people were, how they lived, and how they died. These faces from the past still hold many secrets. Tom Perry, CBC News, Ottawa.
Straight ahead, tape recordings help bring down one U.S. president. We'll get expert insight into Donald Trump's situation and why he should be wary.
It's not fashionable these days to spend too much time or enthusiasm arguing that there are differences between men and women. We've spent a lot of time denying that any differences exist. You can get into a lot of trouble claiming anything else. I'd like to suggest there's an immutable universal truth, an undeniable behavior pattern that separates the sexes. It involves yogurt containers. Women save them, men throw them out.
A lot of bands and parades like these represent police forces and cadet groups, things like that. This is the story of a different kind of band. Meet the Top Hat Marching Orchestra from Burlington, Ontario. In this parade, they're a little older, a little wiser, and a little lost. I've always been a little out of step with most of my colleagues who work in this racket called journalism. Most of my friends want to write for the front pages, want to chase the big stories. The stories I like best are the ones where there's no plot to begin with, no headlines, no news peg. One thing you learn when you poke around off stage long enough is that people love to talk. Another thing you learn is that if you stick around long enough, and you listen hard enough, everyone has something worth saying. I owe you next. Oh, okay. A Madagascar kissing cockroach. It looks like a beetle, or like a cigar, the end of a cigar.
He's going to grow to be 6 inches, Peter, and you don't have to walk him.
6 inches, I don't.
All you have to do is name him and watch him grow.
Get in
There, you little sick cockroach. Stuart McLean.
Thank you very much.
In Moose Jaw.
You know, the great British statesman Winston Churchill once said that success is going from one failure to another without losing enthusiasm. But there's got to be a limit. I had a cow who couldn't learn her lines, a little girl who thought she was starring in a beauty pageant. The set wouldn't fit through the doors. Joseph was covered with scabs. And I was worried that I was coming down with the chicken pox.
So when I'm writing, I'm always trying to take people to the place of laughter, but also to the place where laughter meets tears.
We want to dig a little deeper into one of our top stories tonight, Donald Trump's firing of FBI Director James Comey. It may be the first time Americans have seen a dismissal of this kind, but it's got people talking almost nonstop about one notorious time in recent U.S. history, tape recordings in the Nixon White House. I'm joined by historian Ken Hughes, who has studied and written extensively about those times. He's in Washington, so Ken, you must be having a few flashbacks these last few days.
Yes, I am, Wendy. It's been very reminiscent of some of the more tumultuous times during the Nixon administration. But then again, as one of my colleagues says, the Trump administration seems to be like Nixon speed dating.
I want to get into more comment in a moment, but first of all, the White House is not making any comments as to whether there are actually tapes here. Do presidents since Nixon, do they record conversations?
Well, the short answer is America does not know. As you realize, we have in our smartphones more sophisticated recording devices than any president in the 1960s or 1970s had at his disposal.
Right.
So it's altogether possible that Donald Trump has made these tape recordings.
The Democrats have asked that if they do exist, that they be made public.
Yes.
Who knows what's on them if they actually exist? Is there a possibility that Donald Trump could actually be hurt by these tapes?
I don't think he realized when he posted that tweet this morning that now whatever conversations he has had with or about former FBI Director Comey can be subpoenaed. They now constitute evidence in any investigation of whether President Trump obstructed justice by firing Comey.
So what would you be looking for if you were allowed to poke around on those tapes?
Well, I would subpoena everything that had anything to do with the firing of Comey. It seems from President Trump's comments since the firing that one of the things that was prominent in his mind was the Russia investigation and how unhappy he was with it. He doesn't like the way it seems to detract from his election win in November. It threatens some of his friends, like former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and Roger Stone. And for all we know, the investigation could eventually turn up some secrets that President Trump himself wants to keep. But in any of those circumstances, the president would be obstructing justice if he fired the FBI director to halt or to limit that investigation. So I think he has really created a much bigger problem for himself today than he had even yesterday when he first acknowledged that the Russia investigation was a factor in his decision.
So you're a presidential historian. How historic is this potentially?
The potential is always great. The actual event, we don't yet know. I know that's an unsatisfactory answer. What's really at stake here, though, is a very fundamental principle of American government. And that principle is that no one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. That principle was jeopardized when Richard Nixon fired Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox during the Saturday Night Massacre in October of 1973. And that principle is at stake today. Early news reports on the firing of Comey said, mistakenly in my opinion, that the president can fire the FBI director for any reason. Well, he can't do it for an illegal reason, such as obstructing justice. So now we really need to have the next FBI director, whoever he or she may be,
nominated by Donald Trump, of course.
Nominated by Donald Trump, confirmed or rejected by the U.S. Senate. We have to make sure that that person has the independence, the authority to investigate all crimes, even those related to the president and the president's campaign, with complete independence and without any political interference.
I realize it might be hard to make a big call like this, but President Nixon, he was forced to resign after those tapes became public. So people are making comparisons. You've got the possibility of tapes, the firing, the allegations of possible criminal activity. How strong a similarity do you see between Watergate and what's going on now?
Well, the introduction of the question of obstruction of justice makes the threat of impeachment much greater. The first article of impeachment against Richard Nixon was for obstruction of justice. He tried to impede the Watergate investigation. The third article of impeachment for President Bill Clinton was also obstruction of justice. He was accused of inducing people to lie to cover up his affair with Monica Lewinsky. So America has a history of taking obstruction of justice very seriously. It's not only a crime in our ordinary criminal law, it's an impeachable offense in our Constitution.
Well, so much to watch here. Ken Hughes, thank you so much. It's fascinating to hear your perspective on this. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me, Wendy.
When we come back, famine in the Middle East.
Right now in Yemen, and this is the tragedy of the humanitarian situation, there is no military solution in Yemen.
This crisis developed while the world mostly looked the other way. What will it take to end it? Plus, shark fins strike fear in LA. Why the swimmers should just get over it. Let's check the day's business numbers. A quiet day on the markets. The TSX fell 12 points. The dollar ends the week below 73 cents US. In New York, the Dow dropped 22 points. The price of oil rose by a penny.
You have to go for a dope test.
A track star nowadays has to be followed around by a doping official almost any time she wins a major event. What the testers are mainly looking for here is the subject of an international ban. Anabolic steroids, a derivative of the male sex hormone which is supposed to build muscle.
The athletes say all this doping control business is a bit of a waste of time and money, which is something the Canadian team does not have in abundance.
Good evening. The nation is in shock tonight over the downfall of a Canadian hero. Ben Johnson, who made the country so proud on Friday, was, just hours ago, thrown out of the Olympics for taking drugs, steroids.
Oh, that's devastating.
It makes me wonder what's happening to Canadian athletics.
It's the biggest disappointment anybody could ever imagine.
In this Montreal lab, scientists test the blood and urine of athletes for signs of drug use, signs of cheating. There's no shortage of work and much more to come now that Montreal has been named headquarters of the World Anti-Doping Agency.
There will be more pressure on Canadian athletes, but not only Canadian athletes, all athletes around the world.
Europe's fastest sprinter has become the latest athlete to test positive for a new designer steroid called THG. The drug is at the heart of a widening doping scandal in the U.S.
Fortunes have fallen for American sprinter Marion Jones.
American cyclist Floyd Landis has admitted to using performance-enhancing drugs.
Lance Armstrong has finally coughed up what was pretty much an open secret.
Do you feel disgraced? Of course.
If you're the second best athlete in the world, you might do anything to be number one. Whether there's testing or whether there isn't testing.
This is Mordecai Richler, a Canadian writer now living in England. And these are some of the things he writes.
Young people are leaving Canada, one, because they feel there is no opportunity for them at home, and two, because they're bored.
It's a small country, and if you're an English-speaking Canadian, there's certainly no capital. The cultural capitals are either New York or London. Another reason I write is it's this continuing attempt to evolve a standard or a position or a moral posture. And I work it out in my books, and I'm still working it out.
My loyalties, or what I think of as Canada, is really Montreal, the Laurentians, the region surrounding the city. I tend to feel something of a stranger in other parts of Canada. I have no overwhelming sense of country.
I'm not the most pretentious of writers. I write for my own pleasure and for my friends, and I hope to find as wide an audience as possible. I try to be an honest witness to my times.
You have been known to make rather rude statements in public, probably slightly under the influence of...
No, that's not fair. I mean, what I mean is, I wasn't necessarily under the influence.
You mean you can be rude without drinking, is that?
If called upon.
Multiculturalism was a very well-intended notion, like most Canadian notions, but not very bright like most Canadian notions.
I'm trying to tell the truth. I don't think that it's something that has to be in season like hockey or hay fever. I think you should be able to tell the truth at any time. And if it makes people uncomfortable, I can't help it. Well, I think I'm very fortunate in that most men work at jobs they dislike intensely because they have to support a family, and most women do. So anyone who's being paid to do work he enjoys is very privileged in this world, and I don't have to ingratiate myself with anybody or taint my work in order to make it appealing. So I'm very lucky.
You may have seen some of the National's coverage of the famine in South Sudan. It's just part of an arc of hunger stretching from Nigeria to Yemen. The catastrophe in Yemen could dwarf all the others, but many haven't heard of it. Seeing it is difficult. Behind the starvation is civil war, the bitter harvest of the so-called Arab Spring. And right now, the West is selling far more in weapons to the region than it's spending on aid. The scale of hunger in Yemen is crushing. 17 million people hunting for food, nearly 7 million slowly starving. And as always, the newest to life are the closest to death.
We're talking about children dying every 6 to 10 minutes in Yemen alone.
Yemen is like Syria without cameras, and by that I mean the suffering of Yemenis is not as well documented, it's not as well YouTubed, Facebook, Twitter.
This is a massive humanitarian tragedy, and the UN has been desperately trying to collect some funds over the last few months, over the last few years, but has not been coming anywhere near the amounts it needs just to respond to the immediate needs of the crisis, let alone to start planning for the future.
Humanitarian effort can try its best to do something about this situation, but already it is very late.
A crisis like this never happens overnight. A daisy chain of disaster in Yemen stretches back to the Arab Spring uprising of 2011. A time of hope when countries across the region rose up against authoritarian leaders.
The uprising of 2011 really, in a way, was the spark that caused what was probably the inevitable collapse of Yemen. The frustrations, the fault lines, regional and political, throughout the country had been building up. They were boiling beneath the surface, and they would have exploded at some point.
Politics were bigger than our dreams. So we dreamt for a better future, and all of those rosy ideas about why people go on protest. All of those dreams and hopes were really smashed. It was quicker than we imagined.
So when the Arab Spring started to spread throughout the Middle East in early 2011, it reached Yemen pretty quickly.
it was against the rule of Ali Abdullah Saleh, who ruled Yemen more than 3 decades. And of course, that was not easy for him to swallow.
Saleh's troops opened fire on protesters, but that only triggered mass defections. A deal brokered by Saudi Arabia and other powers in the region forced him from office, but not from the country.
Ali Abdullah Saleh let go of power, but never let go of politics. He was preparing for a civil war.
President Saleh is a fascinating character, a very unsavory character, but he fundamentally stayed alive, and by alive I mean politically alive, but physically alive, from 1978 by constantly manipulating alliances within Yemen, through his tribal networks, within the armed forces, within the security forces, within business networks, but also externally.
Especially during the last, I would say the last decade of his rule, he was smart in milking international aid in the name of fighting terrorism. So most of the weapons that he has today, he was given by the US or the UK.
In 2015, Saleh and his allies joined with a rebellion in the north of the country known as the Houthis.
We will not stop until the last beat of our hearts, until the last drop of our blood. Women, men, and children will fight.
Saudi Arabia, pointing to Houthi ties to its arch-rival Iran, intervened to prop up the government.
These operations to prevent Yemen from falling at the hands of the Houthis.
Saudi airstrikes and a naval blockade were condemned by human rights groups. For the poorest country in the Arab world, the collapse of the food supply was almost immediate.
One of the Red Cross officials were saying that Yemen in 5 months looks like what Syria looked like in 5 years.
But the Obama White House backed the Saudi intervention for strategic reasons.
President Obama and his administration made it pretty clear that they did not think that the Saudi intervention in Yemen was likely to succeed. They did not think, in simple terms, that it was a very good idea, but they made the cold, pragmatic calculus that it was better to keep the Saudis close.
It's a calculation the Donald Trump administration is making as well. The U.S. is finalizing tens of billions of dollars of arms sales to Saudi Arabia, ahead of Trump's trip there next week, the first foreign visit of his presidency.
Saudi Arabia, it has the largest, oil revenue in the world. So trying to think in Donald Trump's mind, he will see this as a business, affair.
Canada sees business here as well. Canada's largest arms deal ever is with Saudi Arabia. Signed by the Harper government, it's been controversial, but Trudeau is pushing ahead.
It is a fairly important principle that a change of government in Ottawa doesn't lead to the cancellation of contracts previously signed.
Canada has agreed with Saudi Arabia to the sale of about $15 billion in light armored vehicles. So these light armored vehicles have obviously not been delivered yet to Saudi Arabia. So have they been used in Yemen? Obviously not. Could they be used in the future? That's possible. Let's be frank, when you sell weapons to a country, you are ready for the possibility that that country may use these weapons in war, because that's what weapons do.
Of course, if Canada did not sell it to the Saudis, the French will do, the Brits will do, the Americans will do. I assume that the more priority for such governments is really just show me the money.
This is Yemen's history, a century of local conflicts fueled by foreign powers and foreign weapons.
British jets roar into the attack across the barren rocks and peaks of southern Arabia. Jets against medieval tribesmen. In an age of disappearing empires, the place where a colonial power is determined to stick.
The West traditionally pursues its strategic goal of the day. Yemen's people pay the price. But with millions now on the brink, that may not be good enough.
Right now in Yemen, and this is the tragedy of the humanitarian situation, there's no military solution in Yemen, even if the U.S. increases its support for Saudi Arabia. Even if Saudi Arabia, alongside with its allies, even if they ramp up their support, they will not win this war. The scary thing, if the U.S. decides to support Saudi ramping up its intervention in Yemen, is that this will pour oil on the fire.
Right now, what Yemen urgently needs is aid and a diplomatic push to end the war. For many, it is already very late. Please stay with us. There's lots more ahead on The National.
The people of Thomasville, Georgia have stopped counting how often it comes. They just know it does. It's that train, the one carrying the most galling of cargoes. Canadian softwood lumber, Newfoundland, Quebec, British Columbia's best. Each plank more salt in the very deep wound of Bob Balfour.
Well, it doesn't feel very good to see the tracks filled with Canadian lumber. We know it's overwhelming the country.
In that rail yard shadow, 3 generations of Bob Balfours have cut southern pine here. But the mill's been silent for months. No match, the argument goes, for Canada.
We know it's taking our markets away from us. They can undersell southern yellow pine all over the United States. There's no way that we can compete with Canada.
Here, in the land of the southern pine, that's a little hard to take.
Georgia is the largest lumber products manufacturer in the entire United States, but that doesn't mean its own southern pine rules this place. Canadian softwood, this lumber right here, now takes 1/3 of the market.
Ideal for the construction industry. Canadian softwood is lighter, easier to pound nails into, cheaper. And that's always frustrated the U.S. mill owners. Decades of trade battles were supposed to end with a deal negotiated in 1996 that restricts the export of Canadian softwood lumber. U.S. mill owners say it didn't protect them enough. Point out that 3 major Georgia mills have closed in the last year. Many more, like Metcalf Lumber, are on the brink. Limping along, the owner says, in hope that when the current agreement ends on March 31st, something stricter will replace it. Canadians want just the opposite, complete free trade in softwood. That makes P.W. Bryant shudder.
I think the situation only worsens. Probably we'll have to shut down.
Canadian mills are suffering too, but there's a perception here that Canada has an unbeatable edge. Partly because of the low Canadian dollar, partly because many Canadian mills are more modern, more efficient. But the most unfair advantage, say the Americans, is how little Canadians pay for timber. Where U.S. mills must bid for wood on the open market, Canadians buy it from government-owned land at much cheaper prices. An illegal subsidy, the Americans scream. Don't bother trying to remind anyone here that that's never been proven.
I don't think they're as justified as our plight. I'm telling you, the lumber industry in the United States is in dire straits. I mean, this is the worst. I've been in it 40 years, I've never seen it like this.
Complex trade issues that deep in the southern woods boil down to one clear reality.
It's really hurt our business. You know, I don't have any problem with them shipping it in here, but they should tax it accordingly.
An entire industry on the edge, convinced Canada is driving it into oblivion. Adrienne Arsenault, CBC News, Thomasville, Georgia.
Something that is so whimsical and fantastical that you don't think of anything else but this when you're here. You're definitely not worried about someone nuking some other country at this moment.
Goes without saying that in Washington, you can't believe everything you hear, but you can trust your own eyes, right? Well, maybe not. Big crowds are flocking to an exhibit where the art is inspired by hallucinations, and visitors are encouraged to abandon all thought. Paul Hunter checked out why that's so appealing.
Just for a moment, forget everything you know about art exhibits. Forget that you're supposed to stand there quietly. And forget that you shouldn't touch anything. Here, at the hottest art show in DC memory, the whole idea is to engage, immerse yourself, and enjoy the work of Yayoi Kusama.
Incredible, incredible. To think of her vision and, the infinite possibilities which are always there, but to have it up front and to see it like that, I'm just blown away.
Keyword infinite. Say some infinite lineups outside Washington's Hirshhorn Museum. The Yayoi Kusama retrospective, touring North America with a stop next year in Toronto, gives away 10,000 tickets every week. But every week it gets 50,000 requests. And the Polka Dot Room isn't even the big attraction. This is 6 so-called infinity rooms. Mirrors and lights and the vastness of everything where there is no horizon, no up, no down, waiting for you to step right in. In this room, full of giant spheres, the idea is to stay outside but to peer into the apparent abyss. Turn off your mind, connect the dots, and dream.
Just tell me what you're feeling.
I feel like I'm on an acid trip.
It's also popular that your time inside any of the rooms is kept to a minimum. You might have waited 20 minutes to get to this spot, but you've got just 20 seconds to experience it. No matter, they say.
You kind of get lost in all the art that's in there, you know what I mean? It brings you in and you don't want to leave.
They said you had 22 seconds, and that's 2 seconds more than everybody else.
It makes a difference.
Impossible to resist. We were invited to tag along for 20 seconds into a room called The Souls of a Million Light Years Away. What do you think?
It is infinity, whichever direction you look at. It's a totally immersive experience. It's like being out floating in the stars.
Isn't it?
It's cool. Wow.
Oh, and it's over. Let's go.
So you could be out there in the universe suspended. Whichever way you saw, you would see infinity.
It's humbling, isn't it?
It is. Yes, it is. We're so small, aren't we?
Yayoi Kusama, the artist behind all of it, made her name in Japan, New York, and worldwide in the 1960s. Even then, fixated on endless polka dots, affixing them everywhere. Kusama suffered a nervous breakdown in the 70s, checked herself into a hospital where she has lived and worked ever since. She doesn't run from her mental illness. Instead, she embraces it. Her art, as she's put it, translates hallucinations. And the art world has embraced her. Remember the room with all the polka dots? Here's how it started out. Then they opened the doors to those unending lineups, and the Hirshhorns never looked back. Playing a key role in all of it, a transplanted Canadian. Couldn't have worked out better for Chief Curator Stéphane Aquin from Montreal.
Shall we add to the art?
Well,
look what we have.
Be my guest.
Okay, I'm going to put...
So this is where you become an artist.
This is where I become an artist.
Yeah.
Aquin is thrilled. The show is so popular. Equally thrilled at how. This being the 21st century, the Kusama exhibit has basically become a kind of selfie heaven.
And I think that Kusama, this exhibition will go down in the collective memory as a landmark of some sort of social experience. So what I like about it is that it's really low tech. Although it's all about social media, the experience of it and sharing, and people are on their phones.
And in DC, a city lately inundated with ugly politics and infighting, It's also become a welcome break from reality.
Something that is so whimsical and fantastical that you don't think of anything else but this when you're here. You're definitely not worried about someone nuking some other country at this moment.
And so they come, not to think or explain or interpret, but to experience, and absolutely to be dazzled. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
Coming up, we wade into a hot debate. Canada's Stanley Cup dreams now rest with just one team. But will the country get behind the Ottawa Senators?
Tomorrow, Coca-Cola Company will tell a thirsty world it's putting a smoother, sweeter taste into the most instantly recognizable bottle in the world.
This has got to be the boldest consumer product move of any kind, of any stripe, since Eve started to hand out apples.
Here they drag out all the hoopla, thinking that they're going to war against the arch-rival Pepsi. But it turns out they've picked a fight in their own backyard with their best friends.
I can't tell the difference between the new taste of Coke and the old taste of Pepsi.
Why are you upset about it?
My oldest daughter is 22. Her first word was Coke. Her second word was Mommy.
For decades, Coke has stayed on top by being cautious and conservative. Lately, though, Pepsi is growing faster than Coke. The Pepsi challenge is clearly hurting.
We made our choice, make it in Pepsi.
Pepsi has captured a young, hip positioning that Coke, by nature of its corporate culture, is not really able to understand yet.
I put a Pepsi in the bowl, but that choice is up to you. Hey.
It must be every young boy's fantasy to turn around and see Michael Jackson. I mean, how wonderful.
The Coca-Cola Company is bringing back the real thing. For weeks, the company has been hyping the taste of its new formula Coke. But today it announced it's going to start selling the old Coke again under a new name.
We're bringing it back. The original taste of Coca-Cola returns as Coca-Cola Classic.
We have booster ignition and liftoff.
When the Shuttle Challenger blasts off tomorrow, it will begin a new space race. On board will be two specially designed soft drink cans, one from Coke, the other from Pepsi, allowing astronauts to drink a carbonated beverage in the weightlessness of space for the first time.
Yeah, it's the Cola Wars in action.
The supermarket shelf is the front line in the Cola War. Pepsi and Coke slugging it out in the world's longest-running business battle.
The National. The National.
Tonight.
The 1975 blockbuster Jaws remains the gold standard in horror movies about sharks, and for good reason. Every scene featuring the massive great white shark's dorsal fin breaking the surface fills the heart with dread. Well, multiply that by 15, and you have the real-life shark thriller unfolding off the coast of sunny California. Kim Brunhuber has that story.
Imagine you're paddleboarding in the surf, so close to the shore you can still see your towel. And then you hear this.
Attention in the water. This is the Orange County Sheriff's Department. You are paddleboarding next to approximately 15 great white sharks. Exit the water in a calm manner.
With the weather getting warmer, more Southern Californians are hitting the beach. But these days, anyone who ventures just beyond the breaks has a higher than usual chance of almost literally bumping into one of these.
A 6-footer kind of circled around me.
A great white.
I normally go swimming a lot. During the summertime, I swim out to the buoy all the time, and I don't know if I'm going to do it this year so much, till they clear out.
Which isn't likely to happen anytime soon. Southern California has always been a nursery for baby great whites. Since they became protected in California 4 years ago, the population has been steadily increasing.
This year has been the largest number influx of the great white sharks that I've seen along the coast in my 24 years.
And the trend is only bound to continue. More sharks, more people in the water with smartphones and drones. It's not surprising we're seeing more dramatic video of these terrifying top predators.
You hear of it and it's normal and you always think you see something, but when you know that it's right next to you, it's a little bit fearful, but you know like they're not really, you're not their main prey item.
He's right. Even though these so-called pups are about 6 feet long, the immature sharks mostly eat rays, plentiful because of warmer water due to last year's El Nino. Last month near San Diego, a woman did get bitten by a large shark, which took off the back of her leg. But young sharks are usually just curious and are rarely, if ever, a threat. Here, even with 15 sharks offshore, officials didn't close the beach, and the chance of being bitten is still only about 1 in 17 million.
But we haven't seen signs of those young sharks actually being a potential threat to humans.
Still, it's one thing to hear that from a scientist on dry land. It's quite another to actually see that dark triangle cutting towards you through the waves. Kim Brunhuber, CBC News, Los Angeles.
Angelenos worried about sharks can take solace in the fact that it may soon be easier to get out of that city thanks to Elon Musk's latest and subterranean venture. He teased this video of an electric sled designed to move cars through a tunnel at 200 kilometers an hour. Exciting stuff, despite being part of Musk's Boring Company. The drilling's being done under private land for now, but the vision is to create an underground network where cars can attach to these sleds for part of their intercity journey. The home of the Ottawa Senators, the NHL version, not the lawmakers, will soon be crammed with fans. Just 4 teams remain in this year's Stanley Cup playoffs, and Ottawa's is the only one with a postal code. But will the rest of Canada get behind it? The CBC's Andrew Foote has the story.
Now Ryan into the corner. Carlson scores!
It may seem as straightforward as an Erik Karlsson snapshot. The Ottawa Senators have outlasted Canada's other 4 teams that made the playoffs. They play in Canada's capital. Most of the players, the coach, and the general manager are Canadian.
Shoots! Scores!
So is this now Canada's team? Senators fans are in full party mode after knocking out Boston and New York. And this bar owner sees them making new fans in the capital with every win.
When they say statements like, geez, that Karlsson's really good. Obviously, he didn't see them all year long. He's been great all year. When they recognize players, well, that individual has a great shot. Well, he's had a great shot all year. And it's just now you're enjoying the game a little bit more. You're paying more attention versus just sitting around having a beer.
But will the Sens win over fans of the other Canadian teams? One of the most well-known Canadiens fans thinks so.
I think all Canadians will be rooting for the final Canadian team in the Stanley Cup playoffs. We're all happy to support Ottawa right now. Even Torontonians and Montrealers can agree on this particular one.
It wasn't in. This hockey writer and Toronto Maple Leafs fan doubts that's going to happen.
You want all of Canada to get behind a team. Go get Sidney Crosby, get Carey Price, get Jonathan Toews and Drew Doughty. Put them on the ice against the Russians or the Americans, and we'll cheer for them. In the NHL playoffs, it really doesn't work that way. I think, if anything, a lot of Canadian fans probably root against the last team that's left just because they don't want them to be the team that's going to break the drought. They want their team to do it.
Like it or not, the Senators are, at the end of the day, the only Canadian team left in the NHL playoffs. We'll just have to wait and see how much excitement they're able to generate here in Ottawa and across the country when their series against Pittsburgh starts tomorrow night. Andrew Foote, CBC News, Ottawa.
And that's the National for this Friday night. For news at any hour, you can always go to cbcnews.ca. I'm Wendy Mesley. Thanks for watching.